Have you ever had a neighbor so entitled that they thought they could do whatever they wanted? Well, let me tell you, my neighbor Karen took things to a whole new level when she drained my pool without permission, and then had the audacity to sue me for it. Sounds crazy, right? Trust me, it gets even wilder. Before we dive into this insane story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more unbelievable stories like this one. Alright, let's get into it. The summer sun blazed high, casting shimmering rays over my backyard oasis, a pool I had painstakingly built for my family. It was the crown jewel of our property, where my kids splashed joyfully, and neighbors often admired it with envy. One such neighbor was Karen. She lived next door and had made herself infamous in the neighborhood with her overbearing personality and entitled attitude. Karen always had something to complain about, whether it was the length of my grass, the noise from our pool parties, or even how my garbage bins were placed. Still, I had always tried to keep my interactions with her civil, until that fateful day when everything spiraled out of control. It began innocently enough. I came home one afternoon from work, exhausted and looking forward to a relaxing dip in the pool. But as I approached my backyard, something felt off. The usual sparkle of water reflecting the sunlight was missing. A pit of dread formed in my stomach as I hurried through the gate. What I saw left me speechless. My pool was empty, completely drained. Watermarks clung to the edges, and the bottom looked cracked and dry. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Who could have done this? Why? As I surveyed the damage, I noticed something strange. A trail of water led from my pool, under the fence, and straight into Karen's yard. It didn't take long to put two and two together. Furious, I marched to Karen's front door and pounded on it. She answered with her usual smug expression, but I didn't give her a chance to speak. "Karen, what the hell happened to my pool?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. She shrugged nonchalantly, as if I were accusing her of borrowing sugar without asking. "Oh, that? I thought the water was leaking into my yard, so I drained it to prevent any damage to my property," she said, crossing her arms. I couldn't believe the audacity. Not only had she trespassed, but she'd also drained my pool without my permission. And then came the kicker. Her yard was now flooded. Karen's response left me stunned. I struggled to process her arrogance. "You drained my pool without asking me? That's trespassing, Karen," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes as though I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, your pool water was seeping into my yard. I couldn't just let my garden flood because you can't maintain your property properly," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I glanced past her into her yard and saw the water pooling in uneven patches. Her pristine flower beds were drowning, and mud coated her walkway. A sinking realization hit me. Not only had she emptied my pool, but now she was going to pin the damage on me. "You think this is my fault?" I asked, incredulous. "Karen, the water in your yard is there because you emptied my pool. If you had a problem, you could have talked to me first. You can't just mess with someone's property like that." She scoffed and folded her arms tightly. "Maybe if you had been a more considerate neighbor, I wouldn't have had to take matters into my own hands," she retorted. Her lack of remorse lit a fire in me, but I realized arguing with Karen was like shouting at a brick wall. No amount of logic or reasoning would ever pierce through her inflated sense of self-righteousness. As I tried to calm myself, Karen smirked. "Anyway," she continued, "since the flooding has already ruined my yard, I expect you to pay for the repairs. I mean, it's your water, right?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She had destroyed my pool, caused the flooding in her own yard, and now she wanted me to foot the bill. "That's not happening, Karen," I said firmly, turning to leave. But as I walked away, she yelled after me, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I didn't take her seriously at first. After all, who sues someone over their own mistake? But little did I know, this was just the beginning of Karen's ridiculous crusade against me. The next morning, I woke up to find a letter taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was a passive-aggressive note from Karen. But as I read the heading, my heart sank. It was a legal notice. Karen was officially suing me for damages to her property, claiming that my pool had caused the flooding in her yard. The nerve of this woman was unbelievable. I reread the letter multiple times, thinking it had to be some kind of prank, but the lawyer's signature and contact information at the bottom confirmed it was real. My frustration quickly turned into panic. I didn't have time or money to deal with a lawsuit over something so ridiculous. Determined to fight back, I contacted a lawyer of my own and explained the situation. As I described the series of events, Karen draining my pool, the trail of water leading directly into her yard, and her outrageous demand for money, my lawyer seemed both amused and irritated. "This is one of the most absurd cases I've ever heard," she said, shaking her head. "Don't worry, though. If everything you're saying checks out, we can absolutely counter this." She instructed me to take photos of my empty pool, the flooded yard, and anything else that could serve as evidence. Luckily, I had already taken pictures of the scene the day before, anticipating that Karen might try to pull something like this. In the days leading up to the court hearing, Karen seemed to relish the chaos she had caused. I'd see her outside, loudly complaining to other neighbors about how my negligence had ruined her yard. Some of the neighbors believed her, giving me suspicious looks whenever I passed by. Others, who knew Karen's dramatic tendencies, kept their distance. It felt like I was living in a nightmare, but I knew I had to stay calm and let the truth speak for itself. What Karen didn't know was that I had a few aces up my sleeve: security camera footage. The security cameras installed in my backyard were my saving grace. I hadn't thought much about them before, but now they were my best defense. I went through the footage from the day Karen drained my pool, and what I found was as infuriating as it was incriminating. There she was, sneaking into my backyard with a garden hose and pump in hand. The video showed her connecting the pump to my pool and directing the hose over the fence into her yard. She worked quickly, looking around nervously as if she knew what she was doing was illegal. Watching it unfold, I felt a mix of vindication and anger. How could someone be so brazen? I immediately shared the footage with my lawyer, who was thrilled. "This is exactly what we need," she said confidently. "This footage not only proves she trespassed, but it also shows that the flooding was entirely her doing. This case just got a lot easier for us." Armed with this evidence, I felt a renewed sense of hope. No matter how much Karen twisted the story, the truth was on my side. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't back down easily. She was the kind of person who thrived on drama and loved being the center of attention, no matter the cost. On the day of the court hearing, Karen showed up dressed like she was walking into a high-powered business meeting, complete with a stack of papers that I assumed were her so-called evidence. She avoided eye contact with me as we sat on opposite sides of the room. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry. Once we present the video, her case will fall apart." As the proceedings began, Karen wasted no time painting herself as the victim. She claimed I had neglected my pool, that it was poorly maintained, and that the water had seeped into her yard, causing thousands of dollars in damages. She even had pictures of her flooded garden, conveniently leaving out how it had gotten that way. As Karen continued her dramatic testimony, I had to resist the urge to roll my eyes. She spun an elaborate story, claiming she had no choice but to drain my pool because it was causing a hazard to her property. She painted herself as a good Samaritan who had acted out of necessity to protect her beloved garden. Her lawyer nodded along, as if her words were gospel. The judge listened patiently, asking a few clarifying questions. Then it was my turn to speak. My lawyer stood and confidently presented our side of the story, calmly dismantling Karen's claims piece by piece. "We have evidence that directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims," my lawyer said, gesturing toward the screen set up in the courtroom. With the judge's approval, she played the security footage. The room fell silent as Karen's actions played out on the screen for everyone to see. There she was, trespassing in my backyard, attaching her pump to my pool, and flooding her own yard. The video was damning. I glanced at Karen, who suddenly looked pale and flustered. Her smug expression was gone, replaced by one of pure panic. When the video ended, my lawyer continued. "As you can see, the plaintiff knowingly and intentionally drained my client's pool without permission. The resulting flooding in her yard was entirely caused by her own actions. Furthermore, my client has suffered damages to his property as a result of the pool being emptied without proper care, including cracks in the foundation of the pool." The judge turned to Karen, his expression stern. Do you have anything to say about this footage? He asked. Karen stammered, her confidence shattered. Well, I thought, I mean, I didn't think it would cause so much damage, she mumbled. Her lawyer looked just as stunned as she did. Karen's weak attempt to explain herself only made things worse. I didn't mean to cause any harm, she said, her voice trembling. I was just trying to protect my yard. But the judge wasn't buying it. Ms. Karen, he said sternly, this footage clearly shows you trespassing and tampering with your neighbor's property. Regardless of your intentions, your actions caused significant damage, not only to your yard, but also to the defendant's pool. This is a serious matter. Karen fidgeted in her seat, her bravado completely gone. As the hearing continued, my lawyer presented additional evidence, including the photos I had taken of the empty pool and the trail of water leading into Karen's yard. She also pointed out the cracks in the pool's surface, explaining how expensive it would be to repair. My client has suffered considerable financial and emotional stress due to the plaintiff's reckless behavior, my lawyer argued. We are requesting compensation for the damages caused by her actions. The judge nodded, taking notes as my lawyer spoke. Karen's lawyer tried to counter by claiming I hadn't properly maintained my pool, but it was a weak argument at best. The security footage alone had sealed Karen's fate. By the time closing arguments were made, it was clear which way the case was leaning. Karen avoided looking at me the entire time, and her lawyer looked like he was regretting taking the case. When the judge announced he would deliver his verdict shortly, I felt a wave of relief. The truth was finally out, and Karen's lies were unraveling before everyone's eyes. As we left the courtroom for a short recess, I overheard Karen whispering angrily to her lawyer. "You said this would be easy. How did this happen?" she hissed. I couldn't help but smile. For once, Karen was getting a taste of her own medicine. When we reconvened in the courtroom, the judge wasted no time delivering his verdict. He began by addressing Karen directly. "Ms. Karen, your actions were reckless and demonstrated a blatant disregard for your neighbor's property rights. Trespassing and intentionally draining someone's pool is not only unlawful, but has also caused significant damages. The evidence provided, particularly the security footage, leaves no room for doubt." Karen's face turned red as the judge continued. "This court finds you liable for the damages caused to the defendant's pool, as well as the flooding in your own yard, which was a direct result of your actions." The judge then turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "As for you, sir, the court acknowledges the emotional and financial toll this situation has caused. The plaintiff is hereby ordered to pay for the full cost of repairing your pool, as well as an additional amount for the inconvenience caused." I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. After weeks of stress, I had finally gotten the justice I deserved. Karen, however, looked like she was about to explode. "But Your Honor," she began, only to be cut off. "Enough, Miss Karen. This is my ruling, and it is final." As we left the courtroom, Karen stormed out without a word, her lawyer trailing behind her looking thoroughly defeated. My lawyer patted me on the back. "Congratulations," she said with a smile. "This was an open and shut case, thanks to your preparation and that security footage. Let this be a lesson. You can't let people like Karen push you around." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. But the story wasn't over yet. As I walked to my car, I saw Karen standing in the parking lot, glaring at me. "This isn't over," she muttered. I sighed. Typical Karen. I ignored Karen's threats as I drove home, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done stirring up trouble. True to form, it didn't take long for her to start retaliating in petty, passive-aggressive ways. The next morning, I woke up to find trash bags dumped near my property line. A few days later, she blared loud music from her backyard late into the night, deliberately disturbing the peace. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to let the court ruling go quietly, but I was done playing her games. I documented everything, every piece of trash she dumped, every noise complaint I could file, and every hostile act she attempted. One evening, as I was tidying up my yard, Karen stormed over, fuming. "You think you've won?" she sneered. "All this court nonsense might have gone your way, but I'm not paying you a dime." Her words didn't surprise me, but her arrogance did. "Karen, I said calmly. You don't have a choice. The court ruling is legally binding. If you don't pay for the damages, you'll be in even more trouble. She scoffed and turned to leave, muttering insults under her breath. I knew then that Karen wasn't just stubborn. She was delusional enough to think she could defy the law. As expected, Karen missed the first deadline for payment. My lawyer wasn't surprised. This happens with people like her, she explained. But don't worry, we'll escalate this. If she doesn't comply, she'll face additional legal consequences, including wage garnishment. I nodded, trusting the process. In the meantime, Karen continued her antics, but I refused to engage. Instead, I focused on repairing the damage she had caused to my pool. Slowly but surely, I was putting everything back together, determined not to let Karen's bitterness ruin my peace of mind. Karen's refusal to pay only escalated the situation further. My lawyer quickly filed a motion to enforce the judgment, which would allow the court to garnish Karen's wages or seize her assets if she continued to ignore the ruling. It was a tedious process, but I was determined not to let her walk away without consequences. Meanwhile, Karen continued to act as though she was the victim. She even tried to rally the neighbors against me, spinning some outlandish story about how I had manipulated the court. Fortunately, most of the neighbors knew her true colors and didn't buy into her lies. One morning, as I was enjoying coffee on my patio, I noticed a sheriff's deputy pull into Karen's driveway. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the deputy knocked on her door and handed her official documents, likely the notice about her wages being garnished. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red, and she yelled something at the deputy before slamming the door. I could hear her shouting from my yard, probably cursing me out yet again. It wasn't long before she came storming over, banging on my door. I opened the door, keeping my composure. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, already anticipating the tantrum. "You're a liar and a thief," she screamed. "You ruined my life. How dare you send the sheriff to my house?" I stared at her, unimpressed. "Karen, the court did that, not me. Maybe if you'd paid what you owe, this wouldn't have happened." She glared at me, seething with rage. "This isn't over," she spat before storming off. Her threats had become a broken record at this point, but I couldn't help wondering how far she was willing to go. Over the next few weeks, Karen's behavior became more erratic. She continued her passive-aggressive stunts, like letting her dog leave messes in my yard and placing her trash bins directly in front of my driveway. It was exhausting, but I refused to let her antics drag me down. Meanwhile, the legal process was moving forward. With her wages officially garnished, Karen was finally forced to start paying for the damages to my pool. While it was satisfying to see justice being served, I couldn't help but wonder how much more drama she would create before finally letting it go. Then one evening, things took a darker turn. I was inside watching TV when I heard a loud crashing noise from my backyard. Startled, I ran outside and found Karen standing there, holding a long stick and glaring at my pool. She had knocked over one of the chairs near the water and looked like she was ready to cause more damage. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, rushing toward her. She froze for a moment, clearly caught off guard, but quickly recovered her composure. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You've ruined everything for me. You deserve this." I immediately called the police, refusing to engage with her any further. Karen continued yelling and pacing back and forth in my yard until the cops arrived. When they did, she tried to play the victim, claiming that I had lured her into my yard by provoking her. But the officers weren't buying it. With my security cameras once again capturing everything, it was clear she had trespassed and was attempting to vandalize my property. Karen was arrested on the spot, kicking and screaming as the officers led her away. As the police car drove off, I stood in my backyard, shaken but relieved that her reckless behavior had finally caught up to her. After Karen's arrest, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers and speculation. People who had once ignored her antics now seemed to view her in a new light. A few neighbors even stopped by to express their relief. "She's been a nightmare for years," one of them confided. "Honestly, I'm surprised it took this long for someone to take a stand against her." It felt validating to know that I wasn't the only one who had suffered because of Karen's behavior. Still, I couldn't fully relax. Even with her temporarily out of the picture, I knew Karen well enough to expect more trouble once she was released. Sure enough, a few days later, Karen was back at home, glaring at me from her yard as if nothing had happened. She seemed determined to make her presence known, sitting outside and loudly ranting on her phone about how she had been wronged and how I had ruined her life. I tried my best to ignore her, but the tension lingered. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands, not by retaliating, but by protecting myself from any future nonsense. I installed additional security cameras around my property and reinforced the locks on my gates. If Karen so much as sneezed in my direction, I wanted to make sure there was no way she could deny her actions. As the weeks passed, Karen's tantrums became less frequent. It was as though her arrest and the financial strain from the court ruling had finally started to sink in. She no longer shouted insults over the fence or threw trash into my yard. Instead, she kept mostly to herself, though I could still feel her watching me from time to time. It wasn't exactly peace, but it was as close as I was going to get with her living next door. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, Karen had learned her lesson. For a while, things quieted down, and I started to feel like life was returning to normal. My pool repairs were finally completed, and it was a relief to see it restored to its former glory. My family could once again enjoy the backyard without the constant cloud of Karen's antics hanging over us. Even the neighbors seemed to appreciate the newfound peace, and the once frequent whispers about Karen slowly faded away. It was almost as if the whole ordeal had been a bad dream. But with Karen, I should have known the calm wouldn't last. One afternoon, I was out mowing the lawn when Karen appeared at the fence. She looked different, tired, almost defeated. But the familiar scowl on her face hadn't disappeared. "Hey!" she called out, catching me off guard. "Can we talk?" I shut off the mower and approached cautiously, not sure what to expect. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, her eyes darting around as though she were trying to find the right words. "Look, I've been thinking," she began. "This whole thing, everything that's happened, it's gotten out of hand." For a moment I thought I was hallucinating. Was Karen actually trying to apologize? She went on, though her tone was far from sincere. "I've been under a lot of stress, and I might have acted out of character." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for the catch. "So, maybe we could just move on. Let bygones be bygones," she said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. It was clear that Karen wasn't apologizing out of genuine remorse. She just wanted to sweep everything under the rug now that she was feeling the consequences of her actions. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice firm, "it's not that simple. You caused a lot of damage, and it's taken time and money to fix it. I'm willing to leave things alone if you stay out of my business from now on. But if you pull anything like this again, there won't be any bygones. Understood?" Karen's smile faltered, and her eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Fine," she muttered before storming back into her house. I didn't trust her sudden change of heart, but at least for now, it seemed like she was backing off. I could only hope that this marked the end of her ridiculous vendetta. For a few weeks after that awkward conversation, Karen stayed relatively quiet. She avoided crossing paths with me and didn't pull any of her usual stunts. The tension in the air was still there, but it felt like she was making an effort to keep her distance. I hoped she had finally decided to let things go. I focused on enjoying my newly repaired pool with my family and reclaiming the peace in my backyard. Life was almost normal again. Almost. One evening, I noticed Karen standing in her yard, staring at the fence that separated our properties. She had a clipboard in hand and seemed to be taking measurements. I tried to ignore her, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Karen," I called out, walking closer to the fence. "What are you doing now?" She looked up, her expression neutral, which was a rare sight. "I'm putting up a new fence," she said matter-of-factly. "This one doesn't give me enough privacy, and honestly I'm tired of seeing your face." Her tone was sharp, but I didn't rise to the bait. "Well, as long as you're paying for it and staying on your side of the property line, knock yourself out," I replied. Karen smirked but didn't say anything else. Over the next few days, workers arrived to install a massive wooden fence, much taller and thicker than the old one. It completely blocked the view between our yards, which I didn't mind at all. If Karen wanted to wall herself off from me, that was fine by me. At least I wouldn't have to deal with her constant glares or snide remarks anymore. Once the fence was finished, it felt like a symbolic end to the drama. Karen seemed content staying behind her fortress, and I was more than happy to let her. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was able to relax in my backyard without worrying about her peeking over or finding a new way to cause trouble. I knew Karen would always be Karen, but for now, it seemed like she was finally learning to mind her own business. The new fence brought a sense of relief that I hadn't felt in months. With Karen literally and figuratively out of sight, I started to focus more on the things that mattered: spending time with my family, hosting poolside barbecues, and enjoying the quiet evenings in my backyard. The neighbors began to warm up again, stopping by occasionally to chat or compliment the work I'd done on my yard. It felt like the Karen saga was truly behind me. But as I had learned before, with Karen, nothing was ever that simple. One day, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my front door. My stomach dropped. It felt like déjà vu. I quickly pulled the paper off and read it. This time, it wasn't a lawsuit. Instead, it was a complaint Karen had filed with the Homeowners Association, HOA. She claimed that my pool's design and placement violated neighborhood guidelines. I let out a frustrated sigh. Karen was clearly grasping at straws now, trying to find any way to make my life difficult. I brought the notice to the next HOA meeting, where Karen showed up in full force, armed with a folder of evidence that she insisted supported her claim. Her argument boiled down to a vague rule about water features being placed too close to property lines, which she twisted to fit her narrative. Thankfully, the HOA board wasn't buying it. They reviewed the permits I had obtained when building the pool and confirmed that everything was up to code. One of the board members even asked Karen why she hadn't raised this issue years ago if it was such a problem. Karen, flustered and clearly unprepared for pushback, muttered something about not noticing it before. The board dismissed her complaint, and once again, Karen left with a sour expression. As I walked out of the meeting, one of the board members shook my hand. "Don't worry about her," they said with a chuckle. "We've dealt with her antics before. She's a serial complainer." I thanked them, feeling a bit more reassured. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what Karen's next move would be. After Karen's failed attempt with the HOA, she seemed to retreat even further behind her new fence. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no drama, no complaints, no glares, no trash mysteriously appearing near my property line. At first, I thought she was plotting something new, but as time went on, it seemed like she had finally given up. I wasn't sure if it was the financial strain of the court ruling, the humiliation of losing so publicly, or the realization that she couldn't win. But whatever it was, Karen finally left me alone. In her absence, life became blissfully quiet. I began hosting pool parties again, inviting friends and family over to enjoy the backyard I had worked so hard to restore. The sound of laughter and splashing water filled the air, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder. Even the neighbors commented on how peaceful things had become. "I think she's finally learned her lesson," one of them remarked during a neighborhood barbecue. I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Karen had a way of surprising people, and I wasn't about to let my guard down completely. One evening, as the sun was setting and my family was gathered around the pool, I noticed something unusual: a moving truck parked in front of Karen's house. At first I thought it was just wishful thinking, but as the hours went by it became clear. Karen was moving out. I didn't know the details, and frankly, I didn't care. All I knew was that this was the ultimate resolution to a year's worth of stress and chaos. Watching her leave felt like the final chapter of a long, exhausting story. For the first time, I felt true peace in my own. As Karen's moving truck pulled away, a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying lifted from my shoulders. The sight of her leaving for good felt surreal, like the end of a bad dream. I stood in my backyard, looking at the massive fence she had put up, and chuckled to myself. In a strange way, it was the only useful thing she'd ever done. With Karen gone, I could finally enjoy my home the way I always intended. To relax, spend time with my family, and enjoy my pool without the constant drama hanging over my head. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood seemed to brighten. People waved more, neighbors chatted in their front yards, and the tension that had once surrounded Karen's presence seemed to evaporate. I even heard from a neighbor that the new family moving into Karen's house was a young couple with a baby on the way. They had a reputation for being friendly and down to earth. The thought of having decent neighbors for the first time in years made me feel like I could finally breathe freely. As life returned to normal, I reflected on everything that had happened. While dealing with Karen had been a nightmare, it taught me the importance of standing my ground and protecting what's mine. Some people, no matter how unreasonable they are, need to be confronted with the truth and the consequences of their actions. And in the end, justice prevailed. Karen's departure marked the end of an exhausting chapter in my life. It was a hard-fought battle, but I came out stronger and more appreciative of my peaceful home. Message for readers and viewers. Sometimes life throws difficult people your way, and they can make you question everything. But never forget to stand up for yourself, stay calm, and let the truth guide you. You deserve peace, and with patience and persistence, it's always within reach.